Okay,
So
you
you're
are.
good to go.
I'm good to go. Good morning, everybody. Um, I there's still a few may come on, but maybe they're out shopping. Um, okay, the last issue of the monthly business report, conditions report. What I'll go through this morning is just a quick glance at the economic summary, as well, pretty quickly into the budget, and then talk about wholesale trade. I started on wholesale trade and was looking at the data and kind of took a step back and asked, what do these numbers really represent? So I'll go through that, which is the key part of this morning's meeting. In the economic summary, you may ask, why do I include these high level numbers? And it's basically general knowledge that may come up in discussions with clients or suppliers. And what the problem comes out is they're often misquoted and they're used out of context. And we all know, if you've been in other meetings or you've come up with in the reports, that many of them are meaningless to specific products or product groups, such as the price. The CPI September, it showed 2.1%. But if you were selling food, you were more up around the 6-7%. And if you were selling gas, it was another percentage, which means the 2.2 really doesn't mean much. And even if you get into some of the specific categories, they may even be negative. But they're a good starting point. And if you look at them and when you see them in the reports and you want more information, you can go looking for it, or you can give me a call and say, what's in this number. So building permits down 1.2 for August, but that also points out is what was happening in August 2024, because these are all year over year. Uh, and is August a good, bad? Is the seasonality changing and so forth? Industrial product price, which is manufacturing, was up 5.5 year over year. Raw material prices were up 8.4. Now, raw material prices, of course, fold into the manufactured product price uh, if they buy it direct or uh, from some pre processing. The same as wages, 3.5%. Um, Employment was up 0.2, unemployment was down 0.2. That's a rare case that actually they are somewhat in line. They're usually off in different directions. And on trade, August exports were down 3, imports were up 9. But you can look, when you look at exports, of saying how much oil and what was the price of oil. It causes some problems. U.S. tariffs, employment impact was there. Was just to give a few items that we talk a lot about what the impact of the tariffs are on businesses in Canada. But of course, they're having uh, impact on U.S. as well. Uh,
Question for you, Bob, on the imports. Is that 0.9 or 9%?
0.9.
Yeah, okay.
So basically flat.
Yeah.
And of course, the imports are different. How much food in August are we bringing in compared to other times? And of course, people change. But the truth is, it's in the details. Okay. The usefulness is not in these larger, rather overworked numbers. So if you're facing going, oh, well, price index was only up 2.2, and especially if you're talking about a customer and they're going, why are you going up 3%? Uh, you can try and explain it or basically say that's a big number and it's a basket and so forth. And there are a lot of products in it, and your product may not even be in it. So, yeah, also had in the report, I have proposed, which you see it was passed. I forgot to take that out. So I kind of put down budget highlights, list of items that were also in the budget. Um, some of them are quite interesting. And I looked into one of them, and there was this luxury tax, which I've heard a few people mention. And they stopped this luxury tax, which was primarily a tax on yachts and private airplanes. Uh, but it was canceled more because of what it was, is that these items, it was costing them twice as much to collect taxes on it as it was as they collected. So it was actually was costing money because you can move those items anywhere you want in the world. One thing that has changed is the framing uh, fiscal responsibility with deficit to GDP and debt to GDP. It's, I think, overall good to understand certainly the difference. So on the key metrics, debt to GDP represents total accumulated debt relative to GDP over all the years. What's the total debt? And it's been used for years in Canada. Deficit to GDP was introduced, which measures the annual shortfall between government spending and revenue as a percentage. So, in effect, the debt to GDP is long term, deficit is short term. Deficit is only on the current uh, budget that is put forward or expenditures. Um, it's used a great deal around the world, though it is not used in the USA to any great extent or reported. And we do love to compare ourselves with the US. But also, what I found, and you'll see later on, is that the more I get into details, you find kind of what the differences. There are more differences with the US than I originally thought. There is another calculation that, in fact, I like is calculated by subtracting the value of government assets like cash, investments, and buildings from its total debt, and then dividing that result by the country's economic output. And this is something I didn't know. So I looked into it a little more. Is that Canada's net debt includes, when you calculate the net, includes deductions for assets held by Canada and Quebec Pension Plan. Those assets total $716 billion as of December 2023. CPP has averaged between 8.4 and 9.2 return on those invested assets over the last 10 years. And that's before contributions. These funds are fully capitalized and independently managed, investing in diversified global portfolios, unlike the US Social Security system, which holds only US Treasury securities. And what I was surprised is, and often it happens, is I understood the funding part, but I thought most countries would be into that. But under the funding, fully funded, it's Canada, Australia, Chile, Netherlands, Switzerland, and Kazakhstan. I'm assuming Kazakhstan did that with their oil reserve. All the other countries do primarily a pay-as-you-go system. Germany, France, Japan, which is current workers fund current retirees. They are not fully funded and face substantial challenges with aging population. And that, if you've been looking at some of the news going, is one of the problems in France, and they keep changing their prime minister who can't get a budget through, is they want to increase the age of retirement. Back in the 60s, France had a dropped their retirement age to 60. Now they've tried to increase it over and over, but you can understand that if it's not funded, reducing retirement age just increases the cost for the government. So they have a real problem in there. But if you don't, if you're not consistent on that, or you're getting a much older population that are retiring, the cost of the government can be substantial. So I thought that was an interesting comparison. Wholesale trade. I looked at it, I've been reporting on it, and I've been putting out different numbers and comments and so forth. I don't think I misrepresented it, but I didn't really explain the whole side of it. And it gives you an idea of how difficult at times it is to do analysis, internal or external to your company. So the wholesale trade, this is 2024, amounted to $912 billion. Now that excluded petroleum products and other hydrocarbons, and excluded oil, seed, and grain. We'll get into why in a minute. But that big number, if this were a GDP, it would be close to the size of Canada's economy. If it were corporate revenue, it would dwarf even the largest global companies. If it was a government budget, it would be on the scale of the US federal spending. Okay, it's $1 trillion without oil and grains. But, and it's a big but. And I'll start with an example, which should help us move back through there, is what is wholesale? And it's not that straightforward a question. Imagine walking into a Staples store and buying a printer for your office. You're a business buying for a business use. So is that wholesale? Not quite, and probably not that often. What about retailers importing goods or buying directly from manufacturer? That's not wholesale either, not unless the retailer is reselling through a wholesale channel. So this goes back to where does the information come from? In Canada, the term wholesale does not refer to business transaction. It specifically captures sales made by a GST-HST registered business to another GST-HST register. Right? So if you're not registered for the input tax, it is not going to be included in the wholesale numbers. Petroleum is excluded along with grains because it is an export-driven nature, and specialized methodologies are used to capture that information, and there are separate reports. But because it is captured differently, it statistically can't be included in the wholesale numbers. So it's now the other is a retail channel, is when retailers buy direct from manufacturers or import direct, which you would see as this is B2B, but no, it's considered part of the retail channel and the retail distribution. It is not included in the number I showed you previously. And one of the biggest parts is wholesale trade agents and brokers. They are excluded as well. They are not in those numbers. So I always went through that. It all depends input tax credits. So wholesale trade agents and brokers are by definition part of the wholesale trade sector. However, Statistics Canada is unable to collect or publish sales as the agent or broker are not the owner or importer of record. These sales are not reported as wholesale sales, inventory, or price index. So they're not in there. And that's a huge chunk. And when retailers, which is happening more and more, imports goods or buys direct from manufacturers, it's considered part of the retail supply chain. And it excluded from the wholesale unless a GST registration number is provided by the buyer. Okay. But so virtually that comes. And again, looking a bit at the US comparison, and I really didn't know this because I hadn't looked at the US. Of course, there is no federal sales tax in the US, and only some states impose sales tax. Now, all of the large states, all of them, most of them, New York, California, and I believe Illinois, do have a sales tax, a state sales tax. But how they generally run is also different. Businesses use what's called a resale certificate to buy goods tax-free for resale. But the requirements and application process vary in each state. Requirements are all vary widely between states, leading to inconsistent classification, loopholes, and statistical distortion. Even the US Census, which is the Americans Statistics Canada, put a warning out when you go in to get this information. So in a way, they're not comparable, okay? Because they're collected differently. They're inconsistent through there, probably need quite a bit of estimates and to come up with a number. But you can just imagine in this process, if you're a wholesaler and you are selling to multiple states, whoa, it's got to be a headache. Just keeping these numbers correct. But I think wholesale is a good example, okay, about thinking about source and content. Understanding the source and content of numbers is key to any analysis. Numbers are never neutral. They reflect the assumptions and limitations of their source. So there's no such thing as a good number. It's what is that number, and you try and understand what that is. Of course, there's a whole bunch of things you can go through. And I would suggest if you're doing much analysis or comparison, particularly with other countries, that you take a step back and say, what's in this number and what's in that number, and can I compare them? Credibility and trustworthy, of course, of the source. Definitions matter. If you go into Statistics Canada and there's always this little link at the bottom, you click on it and you end up in about 30 pages of definitions and so forth, of how the numbers are created and where they get them from and so on. Time frames and baselines, of course, you know, prices have doubled. Yeah, since when? Okay. Uh, and what is the baseline, particularly when you're sitting down and looking at a price index? What year is that price index on? Like I said before, there's always bias. The best you can do is try and understand what the bias is. But you have people in statistics, and they have a natural bias, or they did this survey or collected the data for a specific reason. So they obviously left out some data which they felt wasn't relevant. And it may not have been relevant, but you need to understand that. Comparability and methodology, I've put before, is looking at the CPI basket differs across countries. And I was talking about Korea at a while, where 60% of the CPI is the cost of rice. So you can't compare CPI or price increases between the two countries. Contextual relevance, and I hadn't thought about this a lot because I particularly work in Canadian data. They can be accurate but irrelevant. And when you look at household debt and other cultural framework, it was a European country I looked at, and something like 80% of the people rent. So looking at that and saying there is no cost, the cost of housing is rent, but the debt, okay, is quite low because they don't have mortgages, they don't own the property. And there was another where it was a city and people just didn't own cars. So that affects what the household debt is. And looking at limitations and blind spots. So it's kind of easy to go through and tick those off, such as agents and brokers. If you were looking at the wholesale and realize agents and brokers weren't in there, now they are in, of course, everything ends up in retail, but that's even not that clear. This can be a little disconcerting, but is this bar here on your screen, Mike? Michael?
Yep, it's there.
Oh, is there any way to get rid of? Oh, it just moved. Okay, good. Now this I found interesting. It kind of makes a point of what is changing in the markets, both retail, wholesale, and even manufacturing, which is PPI. Retail benchmark rises much faster by 2020. Rise much faster. By 2025, the retail index reached 180 compared to wholesale at 95. So retail is up, and we'll get into pieces of the components of that. CPI versus product price index, which is manufacturing, also diverge. CPI inflation rises faster than manufacturers, exaggerating the escalation when contracts are tied to consumer pricing. And I'll go over this in a minute, but the risk is if escalation clauses or pricing ties to retail CPI. So if you're using CPI, are you pricing to the right market? Are you tying contracts to the right market? All right. Now, of course, down below, wholesale service price index, and you have to know this, does not include the product price. It includes all other costs. Okay. It is what is sold, but they take off minus the product. And that's the key where it has service. Okay, let's go over it a little more. Instead of an index, let's say this is just a product. We all know that inflation and cost increase affect all costs. Now, retail years ago used to be fairly simple. This is what they did. But now they're purchasing more and more direct from manufacturers, and they're importing direct more goods. So in that side is now their costs are increasing because they need warehousing, distribution, they have inward freight, inventory, and the sourcing process. And I kind of changed sourcing from differentiated from purchasing, with sourcing going out and finding the products, usually in somewhere around the world, which can be a lot more expensive process. Now, merchant wholesale is stayed relatively, and I say merchant as opposed to an agent, because they have warehousing, distribution, inward freight, inventory, and sourcing. So that's where the wholesale service price is all of these costs, plus, of course, a profit margin and other administrative costs. So it's important, if you look at the numbers and you look at the values, is who is incurring the cost. But a bigger question, and I think going forward, is who is more efficient? And I think we have both retailers and wholesalers on the line, as well as a number of agents. Economies of scale are key. Wholesalers, particularly larger wholesalers, should be more efficient in terms of logistics, cost per unit, and risk management. Retailers importing direct can be efficient in terms of margin capture and responsive to customer demand, but only if they have scale, expertise, and the cash flow to manage that added complexity. So when you're looking at numbers, and you're looking even at retail numbers, this isn't just merchant wholesale, but I think it's an excellent example. You need to think of what is included in that number. Where retail, there's been a shift of when they go direct, is the costs are shifting from merchant wholesale to the retail. So shifts in the wholesale trade. Global sourcing, e-commerce platforms allow retailers to connect directly. And a retailer can go on and they can order direct from Asia, from a manufacturer in Asia, and so forth, much more than they could ever before. Private label has expanded, which is really another way that retailers are importing or buying direct from manufacturers. Technology, it's easier. It's easier to manage inventory, fulfillment, and the reduced reliance on intermediaries. And that's big. Before, it took an awful lot of brain power and experience and so forth. And some of the systems now you can get on can do a pretty good job at managing inventory and fulfillment. But cost control pressures, retailers seek margin improvements by cutting out wholesale markups. But are they trading efficiency for margin? And I'm not sure, and maybe at the end some people can talk, if you discuss this, okay, when you are negotiating prices with retailers and they have this as the price, but are they talking about the whole price? They bought the product cheaper, but now are they looking at their total costs, which includes the warehousing, inventory costs, and distribution costs that they didn't have when they used to deal through a wholesale? But there is a question, is it time for wholesalers to change? Because if you look at the definitions and how the numbers were collected and so forth, wholesalers are a hybrid service distribution industry. So why shouldn't they be selling services, not just the traditional wholesale services, logistics, doing things like logistics integrator, okay, coordinating multiple transport, customer clearance, so on and so forth, areas that they have been working in for years, forever. Data services, many have invested in those services. Retailer, and I think everybody knows as you put in a new system and it's more sophisticated, it can take years before you get a return just for your staff to understand the new system and use it properly. B2B platform operators is run a B2B. A lot of retailers now are looking for B2B platforms to buy products and so forth. Everything's there. You see everybody's friend Amazon is now, open a business account. I tried to nail it down whether you actually have to have a GST, HST number before you open one of those accounts, or they kind of leave it up to you. And if you don't have it, well, you can't use the input tax. Consulting. Sure, maybe some retailers want to get into the business, they want to buy direct and so forth, but do they really understand what it is all about? And so guiding clients through complex import-export regulations and evolving tax regimes. And they're all different by different countries. Wholesaler may have specialized knowledge in dealing with a specific country. It takes years to get that kind of experience. And also looking at a hybrid wholesale trade, agents and brokers act as transaction facilitator without owning the inventory, which is selling the services, making the most of your systems and infrastructure. And these are critical to market access and price efficiency. What I look for is anybody who would estimate or give a guess on just how much we're talking about. And you're probably, and this is probably lowballing, 500 million. Oil and grains is 500 million. So where we started out with wholesale, by definition, it's probably closer to $2 trillion than one. Now, so retailers are changed. Is it time for wholesalers to change and kind of sit down and make an offer? Everybody's good at certain things, and that's how you manage costs. Now, I've taken a long way to get to the final slide, which is actually where I started. Merchant wholesale price index. And that's where I started for the report and for this webinar, is now looking at some of these numbers. I think they start to have a little more meaning when you think about what is in those numbers and what isn't in numbers. This is merchant wholesaler price index. The cost of the product that the wholesaler buys is not in this number. Right? It's the service that they provide. So that's basically, what time is it? Lost it. What
Well,
time is it?
yeah, it's about 9:40.
Okay. This has kind of been one of my shortest. So questions. I would say if you do analysis or you have somebody doing analysis, is take a step back and ask, you know, how well did they know their numbers? Michael and I were talking a little before the meeting and saying we've all seen, or I have, distortions in internal numbers where you had a category and you monitor that on a monthly basis and is it hitting plan and is it not? And nobody's looked at to see if the products were properly coded and found out that they weren't. So they've been explaining stuff that didn't need explaining. It was just that one product was in the wrong category. So I'm kind of talking to that level. Uh, it data can be so distorting at times. Anyway, so any questions?
Bob, did you have any comments on the federal budget and what was included in the report? I know you summarized a few things.
Yeah, I was surprised. I actually read the report for one of the first times, and I was surprised at how little detail was actually in it, even though it was 200 pages long or something like that. Had a lot of pictures, had a lot of maps, had a lot of big headings. Um, but it's hard to comment until you will see the details start coming out, which I think we've seen over the last week or so. But I think it will continue. The items listed in there, I have more details on each one of them, but explaining them is a long process, and the details of what this applies to and so forth are kind of lost in the title. If you are using or this is important to you, you're probably best to take a look at it individually to see if it applies to you or your business. Or ask me. I have some information on it, but still.
All right.
No.
Anyone in the audience have any questions for Bob?
Bob, do you have a Millennial Falcon by chance?
uh, maybe I can get
It won't cost you much.
one. Do you carry them, John?
I don't. I don't. I wish I did. I'd take one to some far off galaxy.
Oh, I was out looking for one of your pro knives yesterday and didn't find it on sale.
Pro knives.
Zwilling Pro. They
Oh,
dropped.
that's not us. That's a different brand.
Really?
Yeah,
It's, oh,
yeah, different brand. We
but
sold
you,
we sold a big chunk of our knife business a couple of years ago.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, they're not doing too good on Black Friday.
Yeah. No, it's not us.
Oh, okay. I thought you still had it.
Okay. Well, listen, hey, thanks guys. Appreciate the data.
I, I appreciate everybody coming, and I hope I just, get a little kind of question mark in your head. And if somebody says this is up 10%, and you say, I don't think so, start asking questions.
Yeah, I say that in my head all the time when the government puts out their inflation data. Just look at just look at the costs, right? Your consumers, I don't think consumers are, well, some are, but I think a lot of consumers see what they're spending on gas and food and insurance and everything's going up and it seems to be going up at a pace larger than what they report. And on some of our calls, Michael, going back a couple of years ago, you know, the 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 pace of increases, manufacturer increases, didn't seem to be reported in the inflation numbers either. So you mentioned biases, Bob. There's seems to be lots of bias in those numbers from time to
Yeah,
time.
I would say more so it's Statistics Canada has probably fewest bias, but if it takes them 3 or 4 pages to describe what the number is,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
Yep.
it's down in there somewhere if you've got the time to look.
Yep. Agreed.
A very wise person once told me statistics are like a bikini. What they show is great, but what it's hiding is even better.
Yeah,
And so I think you're right. I think we need to all take it with a grain of salt and do our own digging into what reality is.
yeah.
Oh man, that's hilarious. Thanks for sharing that.
Now, I used to do a lot more retail data, but one of the problems is one of the big and bigger players is Amazon, and they don't share with anybody. And I understand that Walmart only shares, and that's something to wrap your head up, only about half of their store information. And my question, well, which half? You know, the half that's in Yellowknife or downtown Toronto. Um, so it's not easy, even if you're paying big bucks for information to figure out uh, what does this mean. Probably the best thing as you've always done is you talk to your customers.
Are you guys using Pro Purchaser or other sources when you're evaluating your raw materials and other cost factors?
Not that by name, no.
Mm.
Which I know a lot of the major retailers use. So when they're
Yeah,
coming up,
I was actually kind of not in the business of that pro purchaser, but in raw materials. I was in commodity exchange stuff when I was in Singapore, and we were starting the commodity exchange. Those are nice numbers, but they're hedging numbers, and and that's where pro purchaser they're taking it. I think most of it off the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. There's a lot of numbers there. It's like gold. Gold, of course, big commodity, but uh, half of the purchases that are showing aren't real gold. They're forward contracts and they're only paper. They never deliver the gold.
Hmm.
All right. Well, thanks everyone again for joining the call. And Bob, any thoughts towards next month's report? What's going to be a focus?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I got to go over the last year and see kind of what people said and what I said and what happened and didn't happen, and kind of a summary of the last 12 reports that have gone out, and see where that takes me. I shouldn't be saying this because I may have been proven wrong over and over. And
Is that
maybe
meeting at the end of December or New Year, guys? Any idea?
I'm thinking
probably New Year.
New Year. Okay.
Yeah, Mike doesn't work the December.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good for you, Mike.
Job.
And I always need somebody to hold my hand to push the buttons.
The report will be out in December. Just the webinar will probably be early part of January.
Yeah.
Okay. All right,
All right.
guys. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Have a good one. Bye now.